You are standing at the edge of the world, Greenland. A vast, frozen land drifting in the North Atlantic, where ice dominates most of the territory and humans exist only as rare, scattered dots. Here there are no endless roads. Villages are separated by ice seas and stone mountains, where the next journey may begin on a dog sled or aboard a helicopter cutting through the fog. Greenland is not just a place. It is the feeling of standing before nature in its purest state, where silence carries weight, and every breath reminds you that humans are not the center of this world. Step deeper into the land of ice and wind, where Earth remains as wild as it was in the beginning. Nuuk. On Greenland's southwest coast, Nuuk functions as a port city in a sub-Arctic setting, where residential areas sit on slopes facing a sheltered fjord to use terrain protection and maintain direct access to the waterfront. The city structure mixes low-rise neighborhoods with concentrated apartment blocks, connected by short, steep streets that rely on a main road spine and terrain-based links for everyday circulation. Urban infrastructure concentrates around the harbor and public service nodes, creating clear activity centers for logistics, trade, and daily needs, while the shoreline zone supports seasonal marine access tied to fishing and transport. With long winters and fast weather shifts, many buildings prioritize insulation performance and large windows to capture daylight, and some areas limit building height to reduce wind effects at street level. From wide viewpoints, Nuuk reads as a medium-scale Arctic city, where housing, the harbor, and a steep street network operate as one system shaped by a fjord-edge landscape. Kangerlussuaq. Positioned at the inland end of a long fjord valley, Kangerlussuaq occupies a clear transition zone between the Greenland ice sheet and an extensive glacial outwash plain. The settlement stands on broad and relatively flat terrain formed by long-term deposition of glacial sediments after ice retreat. Direct access to the ice sheet margin reveals strong links between glacial dynamic surface drainage and valley structure. A cold and dry continental climate limits snowfall and maintains open tundra landscapes with sparse vegetation. This setting defines Kangerlussuaq as a distinct inland-oriented settlement shaped by glacial plains and ice sheet proximity. Qaqortoq. Located in southern Greenland, Qaqortoq experiences more stable climatic conditions than most Arctic settlements, with longer ice-free periods each year. The surrounding terrain is dominated by gently sloping rocky hills and broad exposed bedrock rather than steep fjord walls. A deeply indented coastline forms multiple small bays where calm waters limit heavy ice accumulation. Thin but continuous soils allow low vegetation to persist during warmer months. Access to the sea remains reliable through much of the year, reducing seasonal isolation. These characteristics make Qaqortoq one of the most environmentally predictable towns in Greenland. Glacier Iki. At the interface where the Greenland ice sheet meets a deep fjord, Glacier Iki reveals how slow but persistent glacial movement shapes coastal environments. A steep ice front extends directly into the fjord, creating an active calving zone where large ice blocks regularly detach and collapse into cold water. Extremely hard ancient bedrock beneath the glacier confines ice flow within narrow valleys carved by long-term glacial erosion. Ice supply from the interior ice sheet maintains steady flow and a clearly defined glacier front. Deep fjord waters allow broken ice to disperse efficiently, sustaining continuous exchange between ice and sea. This system defines Glacier Iki as a dynamic coastal glacier governed by fjord geometry and ice sheet dynamics. Uummannaq. Located on a small rocky island Within a network of deep Arctic fjords, Uummannaq is organized entirely by steep coastal terrain and ancient glacial structures. Settlement areas cling to hard bedrock slopes, smoothed by long-term glacial erosion, providing stability but limiting available building space. Strong relief forces development to align parallel to the fjord shoreline rather than expand inland. Prolonged cold seasons restrict soil formation and keep vegetation sparse across exposed surfaces. Fjord waters function as the primary spatial corridor for movement and access to resources. Together, these factors define Uummannaq as a compact and resilient Arctic fjord settlement shaped by geology and climate. Nanortalik. At the point where Greenland's coastline begins to open toward the North Atlantic, Nanortalik is structured within a landscape fragmented by deep fjords and small rocky islands. Settlement areas occupy stable bedrock surfaces close to sea level, where slopes are reduced but still confined by surrounding mountains and coastal cliffs. Ancient hard bedrock, shaped by prolonged glacial erosion, forms an irregular shoreline with narrow marine inlets extending inland. Subarctic climate conditions and persistent winds limit soil development and keep vegetation low and discontinuous. Coastal waters and open fjords function as the primary spatial framework for movement and regional connection. This configuration defines Nanortalik as a highly adapted coastal settlement shaped by glacial geology and marine exposure. Tasiilaq. Set within a narrow fjord enclosed by steep mountain terrain, Tasiilaq demonstrates how Arctic settlements adapt to enclosed coastal environments. The town is positioned on stable rocky slopes, facing sheltered waters, protected from drifting sea ice. Ancient bedrock, sculpted by long-term glacial erosion, defines the surrounding cliffs and valleys. Steep relief and cold climate limit soil development and restrict vegetation to low ground cover. The fjord functions as the primary corridor for transport and daily activity. As a result, Tasiilaq illustrates how glacial geology, fjord topography, and Arctic climate shape a resilient coastal settlement. Narsaq. Set beside his side a broad coastal bay in southern Greenland, Narsaq is distinguished by low rocky hills and relatively open terrain. Exposed bedrock alternates with thin soil layers that support seasonal low vegetation. A gently sloping shoreline allows easier access to the sea compared to steeper Arctic coasts. Southern Greenland climate conditions provide longer ice-free periods each year. These factors reduce environmental disruption across seasonal cycles. Narsaq stands out as a coastal town where land and sea conditions remain comparatively balanced. Qeqertarsuaq. Standing out on Disco Island for its volcanic basalt foundation, Qeqertarsuaq displays a geological character uncommon across most of Greenland. Stacked basalt layers form dark cliffs and broad coastal plateaus that dominate the local landscape. Basalt surfaces retain heat more efficiently, creating slightly milder microclimatic conditions. Weathered rock supports a thin, yet more continuous soil layer than in surrounding Arctic regions. These features make Qeqertarsuaq a clear example of long-lasting volcanic influence in Greenland's Arctic environment. Qeqertarsuaq. Positioned along a coastline heavily influenced by sea ice and cold ocean currents in eastern Greenland, Qeqertarsuaq exists in near total geographic isolation. The settlement is placed on a relatively flat rocky plateau, elevated above sea level, reducing direct exposure to drifting ice and coastal wave action. Extremely hard ancient bedrock, shaped by prolonged glacial erosion, provides a stable but soil-poor surface. Severe Arctic climate conditions maintain long winters and extended periods of sea ice cover. Daily activity remains concentrated within a compact area of the plateau. In this setting, human presence persists as a fixed point surrounded by ice-bound seas and exposed rock. Aasiaat, spread across a chain of low, rocky islands off Greenland's western coast, Aasiaat occupies a coastal environment where land is broken into small fragments separated by shallow channels. Settlement areas are placed on stable bedrock surfaces near sea level, shaped by gently sloping terrain and highly indented shorelines. Ancient hard bedrock, rounded by glacial erosion, forms low islands with thin soils and rapid surface drainage. Coastal Arctic climate maintains prolonged cold conditions and restricts vegetation cover across exposed rock. Habitable space extends laterally between islands, rather than concentrating on a single landmass. Within this setting, water defines the spatial field, while land functions as scattered structural anchors. Bahia de Disco. Opening as a vast Arctic marine space, framed by rocky coasts and ice shelves, Bahia de Disco demonstrates how ocean ice and ancient geology organize large-scale coastal systems. The bay receives substantial drifting ice from Greenland's interior, creating a surface that remains seasonally dynamic while maintaining stable circulation patterns. Ancient geological structures beneath the seafloor control depth, profile bay, shape, and ice movement pathways. Prolonged cold climate slows melting processes and preserves a consistently cold marine environment. Together, these factors define Bahia de Disco as a stable and highly structured Arctic bay system. Kujalleq. Functioning as a massive ice stream linking Greenland's interior ice sheet directly to the Arctic Ocean, Kujalleq demonstrates how glaciers dominate coastal landscape structure. Ice flows continuously from the central ice plateau into a deep fjord, transporting ice and sediment at a large scale. Narrow fjord geometry concentrates ice movement along a fixed axis, producing thick and steep glacier surfaces. Frequent carving at the marine front sustains a constantly changing ice fjord environment. Ancient bedrock beneath the glacier stabilizes flow direction and overall form. Together, these processes define Kujalleq as an active and highly organized Arctic glacier system. Ilulissat Ice Fjord. Opening as a massive ice corridor linking Greenland's interior to the ocean, Ilulissat Ice Fjord reveals continuous glacier-driven dynamics in the Arctic environment. The fjord functions as a primary outlet where large ice masses detach and move steadily toward the sea. Its deep, narrow channel guides ice flow and maintains long-term iceberg transport. Hard bedrock beneath the ice is shaped by sustained glacial erosion, forming steep fjord walls. Persistently low temperatures slow melting processes and preserve ice structures. As a result, Ilulissat Ice Fjord demonstrates a large-scale natural system, linking inland ice sheets with cold ocean waters. Qaanaaq. At the northern edge of Greenland, Qaanaaq exists within one of the coldest and driest inhabited Arctic environments. Long-lasting low temperatures maintain continuous permafrost, with only a thin seasonal thaw layer. Surrounding terrain consists of frozen plains and low, rocky ridges, with no developed soils. Coastal waters remain ice-covered for extended periods, creating stable sea ice rather than open water. These conditions place Qaanaaq among the northernmost permanent settlements on Earth. Paamiut. Facing directly toward the open waters of southwest Greenland, Paamiut is exposed to constant ocean influence rather than sheltered fjord conditions. Wave action and strong coastal currents shape daily marine conditions along the shoreline. Surrounding land consists mainly of low rocky hills and extensive exposed bedrock. Thin soils appear only in wind-protected pockets, where low vegetation can persist briefly during warmer months. The open coastline limits long-term accumulation of drifting sea ice. These factors distinguish Paamiut as a Greenland town closely defined by open ocean exposure. Nordvestfjord. Extending as a long, narrow water corridor cutting deep into eastern Greenland, Nordvestfjord is defined by its exceptional length and near continuous steep rock walls. The fjord basin remains deep and linear, allowing inland ice to move directly toward the sea without complex branching. Ancient bedrock, heavily sculpted by glacial erosion, forms smooth and sharply inclined slopes with almost no soil accumulation. Several major glaciers terminate directly into the fjord, sustaining a high and consistent supply of drifting ice. Prolonged ice conditions and confined terrain prevent permanent human settlement. These characteristics identify Nordvestfjord as one of Greenland's most pristine and glacier-dominated fjord systems. Kurok Ice Fjord. Along the southern Greenland coast, where glacial valleys open directly into deep marine waters, Kurok Ice Fjord marks a direct interface between moving ice and the sea. The fjord is deeply incised into extremely hard ancient bedrock, forming a narrow, elongated basin that guides outlet glacier flow. Ice fronts at the fjord head regularly fracture and release large ice blocks into the water. Kurok Ice Fjord functions as a controlled corridor where glacial dynamics unfold within rigid geological boundaries. Narsarsuaq. Formed within a wide valley left behind by retreating glaciers, Narsarsuaq stands out for its unusually flat terrain in a landscape dominated by steep fjords and rocky mountains. The area rests on extensive glacial outwash plains composed of gravel and fine sediments. An open valley orientation allows milder southern air to penetrate inland, reducing ice persistence. Seasonal warmth supports continuous growth of low vegetation across the valley floor. The broad, flat surface enables large-scale infrastructure without steep terrain constraints. These conditions distinguish Narsarsuaq as a transitional zone between Greenland's ice interior and its southern coastal environment. Scoresby Sund, expanding deep into eastern Greenland as a vast network of branching waterways, Scoresby Sund forms one of the most extensive fjord systems in the Arctic. Long, narrow fjords and steep rock walls were carved into extremely hard ancient bedrock by prolonged glacial erosion. Geological stability directs the alignment of fjord channels and constrains ice and water movement within fixed valleys. Severe Arctic climate maintains sea ice and drifting ice cover for much of the year. Land surfaces recede in importance as water and ice dominate spatial perception. Here, the fjord system itself sets the rhythm and structure of the surrounding landscape. Unartok Hot Springs. Unlike volcanic hot springs, Unartok Hot Springs exists as a stable geothermal feature on a small coastal island in southern Greenland. Warm water rises continuously through fractures in ancient bedrock, maintaining above freezing temperatures year-round. This makes Unartok one of the few naturally stable hot spring sites at high Arctic latitudes.